Thank you very much. Thanks, Connie.
No problem.
Thank you all for having me. It's great to be here. I'm going to learn probably more from you than we'll share from my talk today. But obviously the reach has got to be coming both ways. We have to work well together to best serve our clients. And so the goal in this talk today is to talk a little bit about legislative changes and how they might impact the way in which you view your file. But I can't understate the significance, I can't overstate the significance of the RSW role in acquired brain injury clients. So I think the easiest way for me to express that to you is the highest awards that have ever been made in personal injury actions, Sandu and Marcocho, involved the testimony by RSWs about the day-to-day challenges that clients with severe brain injuries face. And that was made real to the jury members and reacted to. More than the hired guns, the professionals, anything the lawyers might have said in their closings or openings, it's what you breathe and live and share and solve every day that makes the most difference to my ability to convey how significant the impairments are and how important the need is for helpful, studied, educated, and great intuition intervention for those clients. Today, we're talking about mild to severe brain injury clients and GOSE, Glasgow Outcome Scale, extended version. How many know that short form to start with in any event? Okay, so everybody knows Glasgow Coma Scale, probably from the period of time when that was a test for brain injury and to help us understand whether a person was catastrophic or not. And they changed that. They brought in a new test as of June of 2016. And the new test has a couple of elements, and maybe I'll get right on to them and what we're going to accomplish today. So we were very concerned, all of us were very concerned at the time the changes came in June, because the catastrophic limits were reduced from $2 million to $1 million. In an age in which everything costs more and in which there had not been an increase or indexing of the $2 million for many years, we thought we were going the wrong direction. So my firm, me in particular, other lawyers at our firm as well, have been listened to, and you have as well, when your representatives, healthcare professionals, have gone to the government, the Ford government, and helped them to understand that $1 million is simply not enough. So the anticipation is, knock on wood, that the previous level of benefits at $2 million will be reinstated. That said, I'm holding on to that table. I just knocked on because I'm not sure that all the changes are going to be well received. We know that they've eviscerated health care in many respects throughout Ontario, and that's not good for anyone. So we'll wait and see, but in the meantime, we know that there isn't a big anticipation that there are going to be changed tests to help people with brain injuries be determined to be catastrophic or not. So I think it's a good reason for us to be talking about those tests that came in June of 2016. And one of the great conclusions I'm here to tell you about is that more brain injury survivors can be catastrophic under the post-June 2016 changes. And so we're going to talk about why. And mainly it has to do with the fact that there are more tests, more technology now to help visualize brain injury. And if we can visualize brain injury, and if a person has needs that we can document, which is why we're here to talk about the GOSE and documentation, then many more of them can be deemed catastrophic. Now, it's always going to come up, we'll talk about GOSE, it's always going to come up, oh my gosh, this person had quite a life that had so many problems in it, whether it be substance abuse, ADHD, depression. Young males generally have so many issues, and females, to deal with during formative years. It's no surprise that there are a population that are exposed to greater risks and expose themselves to greater risks. So the good news, again, if I can bring some of that here, is that those who have pre-accident problems are more likely to be catastrophic under these changes as well. So we'll talk about that as well. And finally, talking about function and the importance of your notes and some of the elements of what can be helpful in your notes to help paint the best picture of impairment so that adjusters say, ah, yes, I see. absolutely, this person should be deemed catastrophic. I don't even need insurer examinations to tell me that. And that ultimately is the goal that I have right here, because we know that $65,000 is not going to get us very long. It's not going to get us past the first year. And so if I can get an application in front of an adjuster within 6 to 9 months, before the money is run out, before the function starts to decline because the lack of services, then it can be good for everyone. So we're going to talk about recipes for doing that. Thank you, Seamus. So I talked about 2 steps to getting catastrophic, and I'm sorry I'm in the way of some of the audience here, but basically I have to have positive findings of brain injury, and we know traditionally that CT and MRI have been able to show some brain injuries, but not all. So for instance, in the typical whiplash case, everyone has knowledge of the coup-contre-coup shaking of the brain back and forth, and whether that causes injury, we'd never know if we looked at MRI or CT. We have diffuse axonal injury. That kind of shaking and the stretching of fibers causes breaking. And I can talk all about it right now, but unless I can show you that injury, I don't get past first base in terms of getting to catastrophic. So how do I do that? Well, there are some amazing scientists and practitioners, engineers as well, who are working very closely with some individuals who have worked in the Hamilton area. Dr. Kumbari as well continues, and Dr. Michael Noseworthy at St. Joseph's Hospital runs a research MRI, fMRI there, a functional MRI. So we'll talk a little bit about why the functional MRI can actually show micro changes to your brain when you're dealing with mild brain injury, previously not possible. So the reason I say more people are going to be deemed catastrophic is we're going to be able to visualize injury for more people. Okay? Those who have moderate and severe, we will have to work hard to get them deemed catastrophic in the early stages. And yes, I don't think that this new test as of June 16 changes the opportunity for them to be deemed catastrophic, but it sure makes them wait. So again, the documentation that makes the impairments apparent will be of greater use and greater relevance and greater need in those early stages, so they don't run out of money. Maybe on to the next things. So briefly about the MRI. I've got a lawyer here talking to you about science. You guys know more about science than I do, but I've had the benefit of a couple of great meetings with Dr. Kumbari and Michael Noseworthy to understand a little bit about the science. So we all know that the majority of our body is made up of water. That's true obviously for the brain as well. And water reacts to magnetism, and we know that MRI exposes the body's fluids and cells to magnetism, and it measures what happens, and then it visualizes what we see as normal and abnormal. So in every brain cell there's a lot of water, and if the brain cell is damaged, then the water is going to behave differently when subjected to magnetism than a normal brain cell. Why would that be? Well, I'll take an example of a straw. We know that a brain cell has an axon, so it's a long straw attached to dendrites at the end with the nucleus here. I think I'm doing pretty well. You getting there? Okay, I think I better sit down because that's about all I can get to. But in any event, if we think of the water that passes in and through the cells, we know that if the cell is damaged, the water will come through differently. It'll come through more easy than if it's not damaged. So if I've got a cell in a tube, think of a straw, if I've got some water molecules in a straw and I subject them to magnetism, they're not going to be able to move like a ball. They're going to be stretched lengthwise, a little bit longer. My demonstrative evidence isn't very good right now. But if we think that if I had a drop of water in the air, we capture that, Seamus, click that camera very quickly and captured that drop of water, we'd know it would be a circle. And the circle is unimpeded by any covering. So if it is not impeded by covering, it's going to respond like a circle to magnetism. It's going to move around like it would like. But if it's in a straw, it's going to be elongated. So the difference in the measurements, which computers do, and this is where artificial intelligence comes in, to do millions of measurements of how the water molecules are reacting. And if in fact there's a great body of measurements that show that the water is responding as if it were more round than tubular, then we know that the cell that should be containing that water is damaged. So Michael Noseworthy, Dinesh Kumbari would have given you a much better explanation in a shorter period of time. But my main point here is that we can visualize micro changes in damaged brain injury cells. And if we can visualize, we have positive findings for mild brain injury. So more people can be catastrophic. Why do I say that? You deal with moderate to severe brain injury for a majority of your practice. The mild brain injury probably don't, and I think that they should attract greater attention and greater support, because what happens, as you know well with that population, is they have the same needs for prompting and cueing. They have the same word finding difficulties. They have the same difficulties organizing their day, processing information, and they have sometimes that problem for a long time. And so to the extent that we know that a proportion of those with mild brain injury suffer lifelong impairments, especially if, for instance, there are cumulative mild brain injuries, they come with concussions, for example, we have the opportunity to respond, to open the door to catastrophic benefits for them, and a greater portion of the brain injury population can advantage. I should have mentioned before, and before we leave this slide, the technology is so robust now that they can measure the differences between the way in which damaged cells react that are typical, obviously, of ABI compared to the normal reaction, that are different because depression does visualize in the brain as well in a different way than ABI. Chronic pain, different from ABI. So we can tease out and actually visualize, and as a trial lawyer, I'm very excited when I can actually show the impairment within the brain. So many different ways the functional MRI is going to pave the way that way. Seamus?
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah, of course, it's worth picture.
No, but the MRI, the functional MRI, does that have to be done at a certain period of time? Like with the other Glasgow, so it was determined, you know, with the ambulance attendant or whoever at the scene. Like, can somebody go back? Does the MRI, the functional MRI have to be done, and then, you know, the first 2 months of the accident, or it's not applicable?
So there's two components of your question. One is, am I too late if I don't do it? And number two is, does a brain injury disappear? I think those are two basic concerns. Well, my point, I suppose, is that I rely upon clinicians, usually hospital clinicians to start with, and then private healthcare professionals like yourselves to identify the symptoms that are ongoing problems. So I need that trigger. Unless I'm retained in the hospital, I'm going to look a lot to your information to help me decide whether, oh my gosh, there was no depressed GCS here for this client, but all of a sudden there are behavioral issues, there's word finding issues, I better get a neuropsych involved, their mental processing is a problem, we're talking about word finding issues. So if you pull that trigger with some of your documentation, then I've got a responsibility as a lawyer to jump up and do two things. First of all, get a treatment plan ready to put forward to the insurer, the costs associated with doing an fMRI, and I'm not going to wait around. I'm going to fund that MRI while it's being done. And does it disappear? No, it doesn't disappear. Unfortunately, if those symptoms are there, then the radiological, is a poor word for it, but the underlying positive findings are likely to be made available through a functional MRI. So, great question. So yeah, ideally I'd love to say that in all my cases I'm retained in that short period of time, because I can't tell you how different an application for accident benefits is treated when it goes in under a lawyer's letter that identifies a case as potentially catastrophic, as compared to shuffled in by an adjuster who has had his or her own OT go in and say, nah, it looks like there's no attendant care need, and this person, if you treat them nice, will be out of our file load within the next 3 months. And I hear about those stories, unfortunately. So I would like to see that happen earlier, because then I can start pulling together documentation. Not only that, I can start engaging OT and RSW, speech and neuropsych, for those individuals who are suffering, so I can have the report started to be generated. So at around 6 months, ultimately at 6 months, I want to be in a position to file a catastrophic application. So I don't know how many cases or when approximately you find yourself to be engaged as an RSW. I mean, I would love to say that that was part of your likely period of retention, but I imagine it's significantly later than that. Regardless of when it is, the capture that I really need from you and every other healthcare professional, including the family members, what were they like before, how are they different now? Every arbitrator who's ever made a decision on catastrophic have made that big contrast. And the contrast doesn't come from the individual, especially the brain injured individual who underreport, who don't, because they're living within their own skin, don't appreciate the issues that they're demonstrating to everyone who knows them, either before or after. I want to get these kinds of assessments done, and neuropsych can help me in speech as well. Maybe the next one, please. So, as I mentioned, collateral information from family members. You're always hearing, Joe didn't do this before. I wish Joe could be like the old Joe. And to the extent that that is important to you, it's important in two respects. Obviously, there's going to be frustration that Joe has, never mind his family members, about his impairments and what he thought he could do and should be able to do. But it'll also help you to determine what's meaningful. And so much of the amazing reports Connor provided to me that show the cornerstone of Element's support and understanding of its clientele reveals a deep knowledge of who that was before, the meaningful activities that you're trying to determine the person has, and how to create a new life that is compelling for them. So I've got a note here that talks about the goals, that breaks it down into the strategies to achieve those goals and the barriers, etc. So helpful, I'm sure, for you when you have that information, and as part of your rubric of reporting, to have that framework. I think that is diamonds for me as well. It's golden to be able to see it broken down about what the goals are and how the approaches that you're taking are making those goals achievable. Now I put something, these are the first words I put in bold here. And the reason I put prompting and cueing here in bold is because I'm starting to bring into this talk some of the language that is taken right from the Glasgow Outcome Scale testing. So to the extent that you know that every client you have relies upon you for some support. Support can be broken down into many different ways, whether it's suggestion, prompting, cueing, reminding, setting up strategies. Wow, that is so important to GOSE. To the extent that there's any of that, I've got a very likely catastrophic client, if that's still happening at 6 months. And so we'll talk about that in some of the examples. So everybody will recognize, in and outside this room, that you know the client best. You're with them more often. So to the extent that the touchstones for these impairments and for the difficulties that they have and their ADLs in using their skills or lack of skills to achieve the day-by-day goals, you're seeing more of that than any other clinician. And so the catchment within your day-by-day progress notes and periodic summaries is incredibly important. The neuropsych testing, obviously, a mental gymnasium for those impairments is very helpful for me. I'll make sure that I have that neuropsych testing because it will also paint the way to a catastrophic designation. And nothing works better than the story about this is what happened. So when I talk about examples of functional changes, that's really why I'm excited by your notes, because the trip to the store is always an adventure, and only you know about the twists and turns and the grab before the light, or the I want these beans, not the other ones, and why don't they have them? And okay, and maybe that's just my life normally, but it could very well be. But you see it so many times. You see something that could be an ADL for all of us in the room that becomes a not DL for those who are suffering cognitive impairments. But the examples, to the extent that you can bring those examples, there's nothing more real to an arbitrator, but oh my God, when he went down the aisles where the ketchup was supposed to be and freaked out because he could only find no name and he wanted to have Heinz, that's real, right? And that tells you, oh, okay, when I sent my son to the grocery store, he actually was able to come back with ketchup, knock on wood, from Heinz, so it was a good day for him. This is different. This is a person who's reacting abnormally in very everyday situations. I can understand that they need support. This is what we want the arbitrators process of understanding to be, if I could. Yeah, I used to have a version of this seminar. I've been doing this for about 2 years now, where I went very heavy on OTs and said, you guys got to get in there, you got to do your attendant care assessments. There's attendant care words in the GOSE. I want to see you talk about supervisory care and get examples. And then I said, what am I doing? I'm having the clinicians spend all this money on assessments. So much less contribution to their life, and there's so much less real enlightenment about the day-to-day problems. So I reconfigured this entirely. I said, and to the credit, there was an occupational therapist who said, MacDonald, your model's all wrong. You've got to get the RSWs front and center. You've got to get that documentation. That's the real documentation that paints the picture for the OTs so that we can actually establish what goals are achievable and have a full understanding of the barriers. So here I am. So again, we're back to what you face in a day-to-day world with your ABI survivors in terms of the difficulties that they're having with dressing, chores, social engagement. I see social isolation is probably one of the more often used phrases that you're dealing with every day, I'm sure, with respect to your ABI clients who lack the confidence to engage in what otherwise they might. Next, please. So here I am approaching 6 months. And the reason I say 6 months is a key is that's the first time, as distinct with the pre-June 2016 opportunity to have them deemed catastrophic right away if their GCS was 9 or lower. 6 months is the first time I can have an ABI client deemed catastrophic. So that's why I triaged all of those different steps, all of the individuals being involved, the assessments done, the documentation being created. So at 6 months, it's patent. It's not a question of me. There are two ways to try and create a catastrophic application for a client. The wrong way is this. At 6 months, hire an occupational therapist, a neuropsychologist, and a physiatrist to do a series of assessments. Is what's going to happen. Well, they'll peek under the pages. They'll see them for an hour or two, maybe 3 max with your neuropsych testing, and you'll paint a picture. And everyone knows that those are individuals hired by the lawyer, and they know that they can be branded as engaged for the sole purpose of deeming catastrophic. And not only that, it doesn't have real information. What happened to the first 6 months or 8 months whenever you get around to doing that as a lawyer? And I see cases that I take over, unfortunately, that are over a year and there hasn't been assessments, never mind involvement of RSWs or notes to help draw this up, to help all of the information bubble up into the prime conclusion a person's catastrophic. So that hiring assessments or hired guns is the wrong way. I really need to see the notes from the RSW, the attendant care assessments, to talk about the queuing and the prompting and the day-to-day activities. If they would not need queuing or prompting, if they would not need RSW if they didn't need queuing or prompting to help them engage in activities, whether it be their basic activities of daily living or determining meaningful opportunities. So you are the recipe for helping me generate real living examples of impairment and the need for support with that impairment. And if I have, in the great luxury, which often doesn't happen, but if I were to have at 6 months a demonstration of a positive finding, as well as 3 to 5 months of RSW notes showing consistent difficulties, the decision is over. The adjuster sees it in real life. I've had cases which have resolved without IEs based upon RSW notes. And one case which resolved where an occupational therapist who had been involved with RSW was able to paint that picture. So, love to be in that situation. This is really why I'm here to talk about today. And if we can talk a little bit about how your notes can relate to the Glasgow Outcome Scale, then we'll move to that now. So, I guess this is just sort of back to another comment. I really think the lawyers have to stand up, and you are in the best position to determine if that's happening for your client. And all I'm saying is if you're finding a client who is at 6 months nowhere near, when you're facing a lot of cognitive impairments, nowhere near hearing from the lawyer that the catastrophic application is being prepared and or they're asking for notes or a Glasgow Outcome Scale test to be done, I'm worried. You're worried. You're worried that the funding's going to dry up a month or two, that the person's going to deteriorate, And the question is whether or not they're ever going to become catastrophic is a nice one, but unfortunately you're going to see hard work undone, and you're going to see clients become more and more frustrated, and the decompensation causes physical harm and certainly emotional as well. I don't think there's any reason for that to happen. So I say your lawyers have to step up. And the way to cue them, obviously, to do so is to try and paint a picture and provide recommendations. The only other thing that I can tell you, you aren't the person to say, hey, pay me so that I can do a report, but I know that it's important from my point of view. If in fact there's a gap between services being stopped because people are out of money, I would like to see you and or OTs prompt the lawyer to ask for a report on the basis of not a resumption of services if they do, and you can work with the lawyer in that regard to secure some payment arrangement, fine. But I'd like to see the RSW who knows this person very well, who's worked with them perhaps up to 6 months, and then funding dried up, go in after 2 months, and to help us understand what's changed. And if you paint that picture of deterioration there and the reliance of greater queuing and prompting, you're helping once again the lawyer put forward a very strong catastrophic application. In fact, that's the most important contrast, and it tells us not only are your services needed, but queuing and prompting are needed. So I really think it's an important new product that RSW companies should be speaking of to lawyers about, hey, you may not be able to afford, you're not catastrophic, but you really need this stuff whether you know it or not, to help show what's going on and what's not going on since he lost entitlement or she lost entitlement to their funding. Boy, lawyers like to talk a lot, eh? Sorry. Okay, so on to basically the Glasgow Outcome Scale tests. Everyone I should have mentioned have a handbook, and I'm standing in front of the number, but we're at 13 if you want to follow along there. So we know what we need. I've told you 6 times. Next one, please. Thanks. Okay, so some key words here. The key words aren't that important, but you'll see it's a really fun little slide I'll show you in a minute. It shows how the language of the GOSE really does help us in a large way. But if you remember for the moment, catastrophic of upper severe disability or lower severe disability at 6 months. Lower moderate disability at 1 year. So lower moderate disability, I'll just go there even though it's backwards in time. I'll ask a question here, and maybe your intuition will help you know the answer that is in my mind. If a person returns to work at 1 year, we know that under one question under the Glasgow Outcome Scale, that's supposed to disentitle them from being catastrophic. If there is a successful return to work at 1 year, you can't be deemed catastrophic. However, if the person requires attendant care or ongoing prompting and queuing and or is not able for the rest of the balance of their life to measure up to the way that they were before and requires support, then they can be deemed catastrophic. So interestingly, that the test itself will support a remedial approach to understanding if a person's got ongoing problems. The asterisk. This was a favor from the previous government. Basically, it means if I have pre-existing substance issues and or depression and or concussions and or I have some dependence, a need for help in some area of my life before, entirely not related to the accident, then I don't determine if I'm catastrophic after I have a concussion, a second concussion, another concussion, and or a brain injury. I don't try and get rid of all of that. I include all of that within the determination as to the level of my impairment. So if, for instance, I have a bad back before, and I'm struck in the back, and now I'm 10 to 20% worse, but if Connor can run 100 yards in 8 seconds, and it takes me 2 minutes, and before the accident I could run it in a minute 50. 2 minutes is really bad compared to the norm. 2 minutes is much more close to catastrophic. So whether I have that depression before or not is not negative. having those pre-existing vulnerabilities helps me more likely than not to become catastrophic. Okay. So why does that make sense in this world where you think that law is so bad? It's only one simple principle, and that is those who have pre-existing problems are more vulnerable to a worse result from trauma than as someone who is able-bodied and healthy. So we have to treat the victim as we find them. And so if they have greater need, we want to make sure that greater need is met by greater financial resources. We want to make sure that they are more likely to be deemed catastrophic because we know they're more vulnerable. That's what the asterisk means. So people who don't have asterisks, if they're perfectly healthy before and they suffer lower severe, upper severe, or moderate, they're catastrophic. But if they have problems before and they've been made in some fashion worse by their brain injury, more likely to be catastrophic. That's a tough issue, but if you have questions at any point in time, jump in. But it's real. That asterisk is very meaningful, and I don't want you to be afraid when you're thinking about your notes and clients who have all of these issues. The more I can see that picture is painted with these difficulties, the more vulnerable the person looks. That said, I do like very much to see something about what they could do before versus after, and if there is a difference functionally, you can show me that, all the more helpful will that report be. Next, please. Thanks. And how do I find that out? I gotta find it out from people. So now I'm starting to quote from the actual test, and I haven't brought the actual test with me, but I've got the questions, so we'll go through each of the questions. But one of the articles, the article that attaches this test tells us specifically that if they were not fully dependent, if they are no longer fully independent, then they are severely disabled. Okay, so what's fully independent? Well, all I can tell you is when I came in and got a tour of the building, I was prompted and cued in many different ways to watch the stair on the third floor and be careful here and there. I was being prompted and cued in that respect. It's arguable that I was not fully independent when I came in here. I don't mean to make light of it at all, but the point really is that in light of the article's specific wording, if a person, as a result of their injury, requires cueing or prompting, they are dependent. Therefore, they are not fully independent, and therefore they're severely disabled. And as you remember from the last slide, lower upper severe or lower and upper severe disabled are both catastrophic. So if I were to put nothing on these 32 slides other than these words, cueing and prompting equals catastrophic, I would have accomplished what I think is meaningful for us to take away today. Next, thanks. So if they can't be left alone for 8 hours, so that means they don't require cueing or prompting at all, direct or indirect, in person or by phone, text, or otherwise, during 8 hours. If they do, then they are lower severe disability. If they require cueing and prompting for more than 8 hours, then they're lower severe. If it's less than 8 hours or up to 8 hours, it's upper severe. But they're both catastrophic. All right, so next one, please. Thanks. So here's one of the questions. Is the assistance of another person at home essential every day for some activities? Then they give you an explanation. They should be able to look after themselves 24 hours. You guys can read better than me, but you can see that includes the ability to perform those activities without prompting, so without cueing and prompting. So the article talks about cueing and prompting, and if you need cueing and prompting, then you are dependent and therefore not totally independent. They use the same word in this test. You can't get around it. All right, you require prompting. All right, the answer to that will be that you, yes, require the assistance of another person. So let's go to number 3A. Next slide, please. So 2A is assistance. Essential, I need your notes. You're talking to me about how the wheels fall off the bus every day when you're trying to bring this client through a very modest set of exercises and or engagements that are meaningful to them, and they're having problems, and you're talking them through, you're prompting them through. So you're catastrophic in light of that cueing and prompting. Next, please, thanks. Okay, 2A. And then the next one, please. I'll show you this test. This is the fun test for me. Need frequent help, someone to be around at home most of the time. Okay, most of the time. No, they're able to look after themselves at home for up to 8 hours. And if no, then it's upper severe. If they need frequent help more than 8 hours, then it's lower severe. Okay, so there's only two answers to that question, right? No or yes. So what if I answer no? What level of impairment do I have if I answer no, they don't need cueing and prompting for more than 8 hours? I have upper severe disability. Does everybody remember 3 slides ago what upper severe disability gets you? Deemed catastrophic. So I'm deemed catastrophic either way in relation to this answer. So that's really cute. I've got a lawyer up here telling me that I get catastrophic if I put anything in the box. So dumb way to schedule the question, or to structure the question. I'm not going to take advantage of that. I'm not going to stand in front of an arbitrator and look cute and say, hey, I get it both ways, sir, because I've got a minute of attendant care in one day. The mom prompted him once in the last 6 months, and it's in a note. I got to have your notes. I got to see it's regular. I have to have attendant care assessments that show that when exposed to issues that put their personal safety in jeopardy, they're not doing the right thing, that they're going to need cueing and prompting in the emergent situation where everybody panics and or you've got to know how to problem solve under stress. Those examples are there. If the story is written from things that have not gone quite right, then regardless of the cuteness of the question, everybody knows the person needs cueing and prompting. We better answer this question in a way that deems them catastrophic. So that's it. I'm done. It's everybody's catastrophic. So let's go on. Next things. Okay. So does anybody think that I'm making bigger and bigger letters? It looks like I'm making bigger and bigger letters here. There's a point. Next place things. Okay. And so this is where your professional lives are spent. It's not so much in the home. What's happening outside? You have to break down those functional difficulties that they're having shopping. You have to talk about the issues, the planning, the cueing in relation to these, the decompensation that occurs in public, the social isolation issues that cause you to fight even to get them out the front door, those kinds of things. You can help. So what I'm why I'm mainly introducing all of these questions for you is so that you help yourself to use the wording that is available on what you think is, and what you know is going to be the ultimate measure as to the level of the person's independence. And if you can, and I'll provide to Paul, I should have brought it with me, a copy of the test, and I should have actually made it as part of our materials, but if you'd like to read the article, I'll make it available. If you put your email on the address for the accident benefit reporter, I'll make sure you all get a copy of the actual article that goes along with the test. Okay. So, again, the outside the home, again, opportunities for cueing and prompting. If we can go on. Thanks. You can see why you are really writing the recipe book for catastrophic with all that you do. Because each of these questions dealing so closely with what you're doing every day. Okay, thanks, please. Where's your list, Richard? Not you, Richard, but did Richard bring a list with him? You know, all of a sudden, he needs some help to plan again, because not all of the plans that should be there are there, and they're needing some support through queuing and prompting to flesh out an activity that's important for them to succeed at. Next, please. Locally. So everybody has an Uber app, no problem. They're nice people. They like to talk to you. Every driver will engage. They want 5 stars. There's water there. What could possibly go wrong? Okay. So I was waiting for one yesterday. My payment authorization didn't work. Again, catastrophic. I fully confess. Couldn't solve that, so I had to use my Lyft app. I don't know why that worked instead. If in fact you've got a driver who is asking questions about, well, what's the building look like? Can you point it out to me? I'm not sure it says this is the address. Or do you want to take steels or lower baseline? Or there's a big traffic problem. Even in the most supported environment for travel, there's decision making that's usually, or often at least, above the capacity of the person who really doesn't like to problem solve, and in a stressful circumstance, getting somewhere quickly, they're probably going to offer the wrong kind of information. So there's likely the indication of the need for assistance there. Next, thanks. Okay, so again, that assistance, required assistance doing these kinds of things. So we're going to talk about notes that I've seen from other companies that have talked about going to the grocery store, successfully purchasing the items on a list, successfully going home, and wonderful. The goal of reintegration has been partially achieved that day. What those notes have failed to do in light of what actually happened and what this test shows so important is note that the RSW who is attending said about 45 things to help that exercise go successfully. And so I know that insurers love to see goals achieved, and there's importance in seeing that success. And I've attended a conference recently last week where I heard Pat Gahn talk about the role of the RSW is supposed to be a time-limited one, but we know for the long-term brain-injured client that frontal lobe is not there, that the executive functioning isn't there, and that there is a lifelong need. So my simple point is that to the extent that that assistance is required, and your notes show that, and to the extent that you are successful in achieving a goal, you can include within that note that queuing and prompting is there. It'll be much more important to both the adjuster, who's looking out for these bywords, these catchwords for CAT, and your client for you to include prompting, queuing examples that you have in all of these instances, community or otherwise. Sorry, just on to the next thing. Sorry, if I can work in the previous capacity. So I'm not going to go necessarily too long into some of these questions, but I got to think that when we're talking about a return to vocational or avocational activity, that's when a real challenge for you happens, because all of a sudden it's not their ability to deal with you and or an individual that you're next to help them with the cashier and their failure to be able to answer questions there, but their performance is being evaluated in often a time crunch and in a way in which it's meaningful for them to try and prove to themselves they can do so. So I can't think that there are many instances in which you are actually within the workplace, but there is a very important rule following any attempt at return to vocational or avocational work by RSWs once the person is off duty, put it that way. And by that, I mean who's around other than family members to bear the brunt of the fatigue, the decompensation, the shutdown, the social isolation in his room, unless there's someone creating notes in that respect. So those kinds of notes are going to talk about what? Well, the absence of my ability even to cue and prompt him into doing any other activities in his life. He's completely a one-dimensional person now that he or she is attempting a volunteer placement and or a return to work, even if it's modified and even if it's only part-time, because the rest of their life disappears and someone's got to comment on that. For why? For me to establish that there's a need for queuing and prompting at 1 year and therefore lower severe even though they've returned to work, or or volunteer. Thanks. I think I'll skip through if I can. Thanks. I'm really excited about me learning something here now, so I think that there might be one or two more comments, and then I'm going to work with my favorite RSW, Richard. You have a great file. You're one of my favorites. I've got a new favorite, I'm sorry to say.
No, you'll always be number one.
We're gonna have some fun. But in any event, I think there might be one more point I want to make, and then we'll get on to an example, I hope. Pardon me?
That's now matching the color of my shirt.
I'm trying to make it relevant. So maybe we'll go on to the next couple. Sorry, I think I made my points on work, so maybe we'll go to social and leisure. Okay, this is so big, right? So at 6 months, if you're 1 year, if you're unable to participate in social or leisure activities, we've got to know the pre-accident ability is well understood when you come on the file earlier. You probably are on the file oftentimes at 1 year, and you are seeing the husband in the living room when the wife is in the kitchen, and you've seen the husband on the patio when the children come home from school. So that familial alienation, I think, is probably the most likely example of what I think is important to receive some comment in light of this question. So if they are not interacting with their family in the way in which they did before, or rarely doing so because of their tolerance issues, that can also help us to get to be catastrophic. We carry on. Okay. So there are going to be a lot of notes from a lot of professionals on this front, but I imagine when you're talking to Sally and Henry, her boyfriend is in the room, that Henry will be able to talk about how difficult Friday was because Sally had some issues and there was decompensation. Again, I know that it's important when you are thinking about your notes and what's included and what's not, to be very sensitive to the fact that it can impair relationships and it can speak to issues such as substance abuse and violence issues. You will, through consultation with your colleagues, put the best iteration of information that is often very volatile in your notes, but I think it's very important for that consideration to be made before any of that sensitive stuff is decided to be updated, because it can be integral to helping with a conclusion about whether the person's catastrophic because of the socialization difficulties. Thanks. There's no ABI client that this one doesn't apply to. So what an incredible test, right? It came out of the blue, and all of a sudden it's speaking the language of your profession, I think, in large part. So with good reason, because it's all about how we do in all of our activities. Next list, thanks. I've learned lots. There's lots more I could, but I recognize that you're together not that often, so I want to thank you very much for having me today, and I really appreciate the chance to share and to learn about your excellent jobs and what you do for our clients. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.